to kind of get our opinions and our views across and to feel like they've been heard.
Even if just speaking to the professionals, I think, so the pop-up stands that you had with Fab, which they would have seen online, would they?
I think you just can't beat coming here in person and being able to talk to loads of people that are here and ask all the questions that you need to ask. There's so many benefits to it. You meet lots of people, and it's just a really lovely feeling of camaraderie and interactivity.
So coming here, I feel like I've kind of felt like that I'm not alone in stuff that I'm going through at placement, and from what I've taken away from this is how to go about situations, how to make it better, and how to feel well supported as well. Because I had some top tips given, so going into placement, I think I take them on board and try and make the most out of my learning experience.
For me, like the main reason I wanted to come was for that networking, for finding my people, the people that are interested in learning about the same things that I'm interested in, and taking those away and sharing them, and because we're on Midwifery Society at our university, and just kind of sharing those with our fellow colleagues and everything. So yeah,
I'm going to be looking back at the things that we've gone through, because there was a lot of content. But I think the joys of now that we can meet face to face, so that's why we really wanted to be here face to face. There is something about meeting other people. So yeah, next time sign up, definitely.
Welcome to Matflix, video streaming from maternity experts. My name is Dr. Jenny Hall. I am the box sets curator at Matflix, a fellow of the Royal College of Midwives and a former editor of The Practicing Midwife. At Matflix, we bring together videos of talks from top maternity experts into box sets to support your continued professional development, study and revalidation.
And good evening to everybody, and welcome to the Maternity and Midwifery Hour. We're now on Series 14, Session 12. My name's Sue MacDonald. I'm the curator for the Maternity and Midwifery Hours and the Maternity and Midwifery Festivals, but it's my pleasure to be chairing the session this evening. And I'm joined by two wonderful speakers here. We have Shebnem Suzanne Sarajevo, I hope I've got that right, Shebnem, and Jenny Patterson. And because we always do this to our guests, we're going to put them both on the spot and ask them to share with us a moment of their week. And maybe we start with Jenny.
Okay, this is probably a rather strange moment of the week, but I grow a vegetable garden, and for the last month I've been quite unwell with a chest infection, so I've had to neglect my garden. But I was well enough on Sunday to plant out garlic. The highlight of my week, planting out garlic.
Wow. Well, it's going to be a highlight in a few months when you're harvesting the garlic. And it's so nice when you've been poorly to be able to get out there in the fresh air.
It was very nice.
That's a lovely moment. Thank you so much. And Shebnem, can you share a moment?
Yeah, I tried to pick up new exercises. So I forced myself this week to try something different and did this Latin-based exercise class. And I was thinking I will be quite breathless, which I wasn't. I was happy about. But then I didn't expect my knee to go.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I tried.
Fabulous. The important thing is, are you going back?
I think I will.
Oh, wow.
When the knee recovers.
Fab. Oh, gosh, that means the ice and the sort of massage of the poor knee. Oh, well, that's a kind of lovely moment with a little bit of a sad edge to it. But thank you for sharing so much. Okay, before we move on to Jenny and Shebnem speaking, I'm just going to do a brief overview of the maternity midwifery. I know that many of you here this evening are old friends, but I know we'll have a few new friends, and I'd just like to share where we came from. and it's a bit like this is me being a midwife. Of course, we were born in the lockdown of 2020 from the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, when midwives and all healthcare workers were actually very busy, were not able to do study days, conferences, festivals. And we really felt it was important that there was some connection for midwives and student midwives. Actually, and anyone in the maternity services, we were very open to everybody joining us to be able to have that connection and really be able to debate issues and learn more. And initially, we did a lot around COVID-19, obviously, because it was very scary time. It was very stressful. People didn't know an awful lot about it and needed to know as much as possible. And I can remember feeling very blown away actually by the work that went on, especially in the maternity services, with midwives changing services, altering things as much as possible so that women would and their families and their babies would get the best experience possible. It was a very difficult time, and hooray for the midwives and the student midwives that went through that, because the whole world went upside down. And I think now normality is back, but it's just every now and then you just remember how mad it was and how scary it was. And I think it's important to hold on to that. The great thing about the Maternity Hour and the Maternity and Midwifery Forum, any of the material we do, it's all copied and recorded for kind of posterity. So if you have a power cut this evening or you have to rush away, this is all recorded and you can access it after the event. And you might want to share this with colleagues over the next few days, and you are very welcome to do so. We like people to share all the material we have, and we really welcome it. Because if you're doing a revalidation as a midwife, if you're learning something as a student midwife, you're doing it maybe a project or a dissertation, there's loads and loads of material there. And again, just access it as you like and share. I'll say a big thank you, as I always do, and I mean it most sincerely, to all the midwives, the student midwives, maternity care assistants, paediatricians, obstetricians, all the people that make the service carry on, cleaners actually, though I don't know if they want to watch some of our programs, but they might do, and they'd be very welcome. They all make the service carry on for women and their families and babies. So thank you for what you're doing. Now, I'm just going to highlight some of the news. Now, I've got a nice news. First woman president of Namibia. Oh, correct. And this is Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwah. No, I haven't pronounced that probably very well. That's really good to have a first woman president somewhere. And that balanced the horrendous news from Afghanistan, where the Taliban have now banned learning for women and girls for nursing and midwifery. And this was practically the only thing that women had access to. It does mean there's actually no healthcare access for women in the whole country. So it kind of means that half the population are not going to be served at all with health, which is scary and almost, you can't believe a country could do that to half their population. And I just hope the international community will put some pressure to just reverse this, because it seems so backward to us here and a nightmare. So we send love and support to the midwives and the student midwives who've had to stop their training because they've been told they're not allowed to learn anymore. And of course, the women and the babies in Afghanistan who must be really scared and so depressed with all of this news. Again, another nice bit of news, I suppose, is the BBC have announced their 100 women list, and there's a few controversies in it, but it's good to see women all over the world who are being highlighted for the inspiration and the work they're doing. It's also at the moment, Take the Christmas Tree is the season of Advent in the UK, and we've got lots of people sharing interesting Advent calendars. Some people online have got some really interesting little quizzes to do each day. They'll set you a little question to see if you can get it. Other Advents are the Department of Health and Social Care have people explaining what the NHS means to them. And today it was Hugo Monge, who's a Movember UK ambassador and rugby player, and just saying what it means for him. And also there's the RCM Advent calendar. So it's that sort of time. It's a good time to reflect on the year past as it's going. I can't believe it's coming up for 2025, I must say. And also the wonderful tree in Trafalgar Square. As a sort of part-time Londoner, it's lovely to see that our tree has arrived from Norway, from our friends in Norway, and it has its lights switched on tomorrow, which makes sure we join places like lovely Edinburgh, where I was last week, where they put the light. There were lights everywhere, and it's so beautiful. It's magical, and I've become like a child at Christmas, I have to say. And also, I'm just going to highlight there's a call for the next Labour and Birth Research Conference in the UK, 14th of February. So put that in your diary, as well as the 11th of February, which is the Maternity Midwifery Festival in London. But I'm going to move now to our lovely speakers, and I'm going to introduce both of them together because they're going to kind of do a lovely double act because they work very closely together on this particular project. And I'm so delighted to introduce first Shebnem Suzam Sarieva, who holds a personal chair of translation studies at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. She's been working on translation and maternal health since 2010. She's also a practicing doula since 2009, a co-facilitator on the Mother Tongue project hosted by Doulas Without Borders, training multilingual birth supporters since 2020. And it's also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jenny Patterson, who's a midwifery lecturer at Edinburgh Napier University, also in Scotland. And her work as a midwife since 2007, I'm getting very bad with these years, both independently and in the NHS, led to a particular interest in women's traumatic birth experiences and midwives' work-related trauma. Lack of communication, control, involvement in decision-making are significant factors in post-traumatic stress disorder, and language barriers contribute to these issues. For optimal maternity care, interactions around communication and consent, Jenny believes we must first ensure midwives and other maternity care professionals are supported and empowered in their role. That both CVs are online, but I'm so pleased that Jenny and Shebnem are with us this evening. So welcome to both of you. The screen is now yours.
Thank you very much, Sue. Can I first check that you can see my slides? Just to double check. Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot for inviting us to be part of the Maternity and Midwifery Hour for a second time. I know Jenny has done it more than I've done. I think this is her third. So today we'll be talking mainly about the unscripted role play that we have included in our research project. In order to explain this role play, I need to give you a bit of background on where this research has first emerged. It was a Royal Society of Edinburgh workshop grant in 2022 when we started working with Jenny on this subject. And the project was titled Translating Informed Consent in Scottish Maternity Services. And this project, we explored understanding of informed consent for parents with limited English proficiency. And to do this, we held online focus groups and in-person interactive workshops, which were facilitated by Active Inquiry, which is a theatre and arts company based in Edinburgh. And both in the workshops and in the focus groups, we invited maternity care professionals, mainly midwives, student midwives, researchers in midwifery, translators, interpreters, some doulas, and researchers in translation and interpreting studies.
So the summary of the research that we carried out in 2022, the findings have been written up, and one of the papers is now published, the other very close to follow. But the main themes and sub-themes that arose from our study are these. So we have the focus around the resources and the limitation of those, and this includes time, the materials that are available, and whether in fact there is access to an appropriate interpreter. We had interprofessional concerns where primarily maternity care professionals would have some concern whether the interpreters had the appropriate knowledge or training in midwifery and in the particular context, but also an understanding around the nuance of language, and that's from the maternity care professionals needing to understand nuance of language in different cultures and different languages. The whole cultural background, cultural awareness is something that we all need to really focus on, and that really came up as a factor. Different levels of health literacy amongst women and families, and the expectations that different cultures have around health and maternity care. And also a theme around power, shame and fear. So when somebody's unable to communicate or is listening to a language maybe from an interpreter that's maybe from a more politically strong location in their area, and then shame and fear can really be part of their experience. And then the whole thing of the experts in terms of maternity knowing more. So these were the key things that came up. Could we have the next slide, please? So the results of that study, that's a very brief summary, but we have already presented on Maternity Midwifery Hour just over a year ago, 2 years ago now, and this is the link to that previous work if you want to follow it up. So next slide.
In terms of the publications, Jenny just mentioned that we had 2 outcomes. One has just come out literally 2 weeks ago, and we have already sent the details to the organizers of the Maternity and Midwifery Hour. It should be in your resource package. And the second one is in press. That one is focusing more on the legal and ethical aspects of informed consent in maternity care. One outcome of our first project was that there was a lot of emphasis on the need for discussing these issues antenatally. So whenever we were holding a workshop or carrying out the focus groups, people were saying to us, but these things should have been discussed antenatally. So as a result, there is a current project going on, again, supported by the Royal Society of Edinburgh. This is a research collaboration grant, and we titled it The Beginnings, Factoring and Interpreting Within Antenatal Care and Midwifery Education. So in this project, I'm looking at ways of accentuating language needs and thus streamlining access to interpreting services antenatally. This is, again, mainly based in Scotland. There are 2 systems in place at the moment, at least 2 systems. One is BadgerNet, mostly in the Glasgow and Greater Clyde area and partly the rest of Scotland, and the track system, which is being used in Lothian. And we know that the language needs are sporadically signaled on these systems. So I'm trying to find out how to make the section on language needs compulsory in these systems, clear and accessible for all the healthcare professionals who are supporting the parents throughout their pregnancy, perinatal and postnatal care. It's proving to be slightly more difficult than I thought, but there's some progress. And the second strand of this project is investigating the optimum ways of incorporating language and cultural awareness training in midwifery education in Scotland on a permanent basis, so not outsourced, basically fitting into an already busy curricula, but making sure that it will be included each year for midwifery students. So this was the background of the workshops that we will focus on as part of our talk. The workshops, we started doing them in 2022, and we carried several workshops in Scotland mainly, but we were also invited to Germany as part of a different project. So I have carried out some in Leipzig. In what follows, we will just give you some more information about what these workshops were like and what was the feedback for these workshops.
So the workshops vary in their duration. So some of the workshops have lasted only an hour, and that timing is limited by the event that we've attended and the available space. Ideally, 2 to 3 hours is probably the best we need to make these work well. Around 20 to 30 participants makes the workshop feasible, and it gives a good interaction between several people. We start with some sort of attentive listening exercise, an icebreaker, just something to get people a little bit relaxed and to think about language and communication. Then we start some role play. It's unscripted role play, so we don't have a plan. We have people with, we provide different characters, such as midwife, the labouring person, woman, the partner. So we'll ask maybe 7 or 8 people to take on a character. We have scenarios written, but we also, especially in the longer workshops, we can ask the participants if there's a particular scenario they'd like to explore. And then each participant takes on that character and we start to role play this scenario. And during it, we can stop at any time. We ask those who are observing to comment. We ask people who are participating in role-playing to explain how they feel and what thoughts are coming up. So it just really kickstarts conversation and helps people to be in different shoes and understand from a different perspective. In a longer 3-hour one, we also included what's called a stuck exercise, which has been used in nursing. And it's a sort of reflective exercise that allows us to explore how we feel in a particular situation or environment, reflect on personally what that means to us and how that might impact going forward.
I think here it will be good to compare what we try to do in these workshops with the more scripted role play, which we are aware that is part of the training that is offered to healthcare professionals. I have been lucky enough to observe such scripted plays in a variety of settings, and they obviously have their very important educational benefits and significance. The importance of unscripted role play when compared to the scripted ones, I think, is it gives the participants an opportunity to base their responses on their own experience. So, for instance, when the student midwives are part of the workshops, they were saying that, oh, they have seen such a situation in their, for instance, placement, but they didn't have a chance or the time to debrief about it. They didn't have a chance to talk to anybody about that particular experience working with an interpreter, for instance. So they are able to benefit from their own experience rather than just reading a scripted play. As Jenny mentioned, it gives the people chance to step into someone else's shoes. So we had midwives acting as the interpreter and saying, oh my God, I never realized, even the turn taking might be an issue, who you will address, whose eyes you will look into. Or we had interpreters acting as an anesthetist, and they were saying that, just embodying that experience made them understand how stressful the situation can be for a really busy anesthetist. And as a result of all this, we find that the responses of the participants seem to be less rigid and more embodied. We invite them actually to move freely in the room, to take, the birthing person usually takes suitable position. They are either, laying on a chair or making all the sounds a birthing person does. And it just helps everybody to really get into the mood. And then the freeze and debrief time Jenny mentioned. So when we notice, as facilitators, me and Jenny, when we notice that there is a particular moment in their acting that needs input, either from themselves as the actors or as the participants or from the audience, we just go like, okay, please, let's stop and freeze and talk about it. And we ask them, what they may need, what would have helped in the situation, whether they're afraid of something or whether they are concerned about something. And then we can ask the same things to the audience. So the audience has the chance to say what works and what doesn't. And as a result of that, sometimes, not always, but we can invite the audience to take over certain parts. So we say, would somebody else like to take over the part of the interpreter or the midwife? Sorry. So we find that the whole workshop becomes more dynamic, fluid and open-ended, so a bit more malleable in a sense. And quite often they are quite fun, so possibly more memorable. Basically, in the Maternity and Midwifery Festival last week in Edinburgh, we had people knocking on the door saying, could you please keep it a bit quiet because there was so much laughter going on. This is probably the advantages of having an unscripted role play.
So in part of what we're trying to do is we wanted to try and assess the impact of the workshop. Is it beneficial? So with one of the longer 3-hour workshops that we did, we put out a pre-workshop survey, and we basically just were asking those who booked to take part what did they think this workshop was about, what were they hoping to get from it, and a little bit about how confident or not they already felt in working with women and parents with limited English or in working with interpreters. So we had some data at the beginning, and then after the workshop we asked again, now what's your level of confidence now working with the women, working with interpreters, and any changes in your understanding around some of the needs that might be here, and is there actually anything that you might start to do differently day to day as a result of taking part in this workshop? Come on, the next slide, please. And so some of the outcomes is some of the findings that we had from here. So in expectations, people wanted to learn about communication, they wanted to look at support, understand a little about the relationship. Well, there's so many different dynamics and relationships within these scenarios. Confidence and understanding. These were the things they were hoping to explore, and we've got resource there as well. And we have developed a resources list that keeps growing with every workshop because people keep adding to it for us. In terms of the before and after regarding confidence, you can see from here that the blue is in the top one is extremely confident. We didn't have anybody who was extremely confident at this point. But we had quite a few people who were somewhat confident and neutral and somewhat not confident. And if we look now to after, we can see that those who are somewhat confident has more than doubled. So, the people that were neutral are about the same, but there's a move from those who weren't feeling confident before. Quite a lot of them started to feel a little bit more confident. So that was just a first initial sort of run at this, suggests that the workshop was beneficial. Sorry, next slide, sorry. Sorry, you did. The confidence in working with interpreters, so that was in working with people. And then the confidence again, we can see that there's a shift from that somewhat not confident. A few people have become more confident, and some of the ones who were a bit neutral have moved as well. So that increase in somewhat confident from 5 to 14, and somebody became extremely confident. So again, in both directions, we've got hopefully a benefit from taking part in just a 3-hour workshop.
In the 3-hour workshop we held with the Napier students, Edinburgh Napier students, we asked them, how has this workshop changed your thinking around language and cultural issues and around working with the interpreter? And these are some of the keywords that came up with that feedback, from that feedback. So they were saying that they are now hopefully going to be more aware of cultural differences, different perspectives. They said they will be more inclined to ask for extra time in appointments that need interpreters. They wanted to be more aware of body language and where they stand themselves as midwives, where the interpreter should be, how the turn taking should take place. So these were the areas that they said their thinking has changed. Mainly it was coming down to knowledge around interpreting and language issues. And in terms of specific codes, when we asked them, will there be anything you do differently? They said, the first one of the quotes was, the first thing I'll change on my practice will be looking at the woman rather than the interpreter, because there's this human tendency that you are actually looking at the person who talks, but in the interpreting profession, the interpreter tends to talk on behalf of the woman, so the interaction might go easier if the eye contact is between the healthcare provider and the laboring woman. But at the same time, they said, we will still be mindful of all the parties, including the interpreters, including the partners, including student midwives who might be in the room. There was quite a bit of emphasis on using props, for instance, in terms of images, or in terms of other aids that might come in handy if there is no immediate interpreter or translator is available. And most of the students said that we need to use some creative thinking. For instance, if the phone connection with the remote interpreter just breaks down, or if the interpreter cannot be found in time. And another important feedback was to make a conscious effort not to simplify information if you are working with parents with limited English proficiency, or to infantilize them. Because in one, at least for me, one very memorable workshop scene, the student midwife who was trying to support the laboring mother was literally saying, it's all okay several times, but not necessarily giving the information the mother needs to calm down and to be still in control of the situation. And we realized that she's actually using the body language, the pitch, the tone of voice, and the short sentences that you would use to a child when you're trying to explain something. So there's this inclination on behalf of people where there's a language barrier, you think you are talking to a child. So they said that they will be more conscious of this in the future.
So in terms of what was most interesting, the feedback we had, and one of the things that we've mentioned is being in another person's shoes and seeing other perspectives. That, people were really talking about how beneficial it was. It's, initially when you're asked to role play, many people get a bit nervous and anxious and maybe a bit shy, and that's why some of our icebreaker at the beginning of the workshop really helps people to start feel a bit more relaxed about working together. But once people do take the courage to step into those other shoes, they find it very beneficial. And also hearing from other students in this particular case, just sharing again about real situations they faced, having that chance to really air them, debrief them, talk about, what might be good in those situations, what might have been better, what could have gone well. And the role play in itself, people found that really interesting. It was a very different way of looking at things for some people. And then some of the other, this was a shorter workshop that we did in the University of West of Scotland. And even though this was just a 1 hour workshop, you can see that, there was a very useful session, made me aware of my role and my failings and how I can improve. So that might sound quite negative, but in some ways, if we're aware of something that, oh gosh, I've been doing it in this way, maybe that's not the best. To become aware of that is helping somebody to, to improve what they do and to become the best they can be. And that's a really positive thing. We all can learn that at different times in our lives. Great. I'm not great at role play, but it demonstrated the feeling of each role and the challenges. And that's a good point, because it's not about being a great actor or getting really into character. It's about really just sort of engaging with it, thinking about it and having a go. And it really can help open discussion. That's the key of it, really. Put consent and real life limitations into perspective, and somebody loved the role play. So that was just after a 1 hour workshop, that feedback was really positive for us.
So far, the feedback we have shared with you was based on our workshops with student midwives, but we were lucky that both in 2022 and 2024, basically just last week, we had an hour slot in the maternity and midwifery festivals in Scotland. Where we invited both practicing midwives and student midwives to this session. And these are some of the feedbacks that we have received. They said fluid, flexible, with opportunity to explore ideas autonomously. They recommended the workshop, saying it gave great perspective. First-hand experience of the challenges and lived experience of service users in need of translation, which I find interesting because obviously these were improvised situations, but it still gave them what it might feel like. It's the first-hand experience of these challenges. Good information on intersection between culture and language and power dynamics. The power dynamics that are in place between, for instance, the midwife and the interpreter vis-a-vis the partner, whoever plays the role of the partner, they often say they just feel quite useless standing there in all that interaction going on, and the power dynamics that might be between other healthcare professionals and the midwives. They said they enjoyed the mix of activities and the involvement of the audience rather than them having to carry the weight of the improvised role play. They were happy immersing themselves in the role. They highly recommended it. And some people loved the icebreaker and the opportunity to pause midway through role play to discuss thoughts and feedback. And I think that is one very valuable part of these workshops. In the very busy environment of, for instance, the labor room, there is no time to sit and think about what's going on there. But the pauses throughout the role play is giving people the chance to be more open about how they might be feeling in that particular moment, rather than pushing that feeling aside and not being able to come back to it just because they're so busy. And normally they don't have these cross-professional discussions with interpreters. For instance, the healthcare providers do not necessarily come into the same room and talk with the interpreters who interpret for them. But this kind of environment gives them the chance to discuss issues in not only interdisciplinary way, but also cross-professional way.
So I think the key things that it's important to say is the workshops generally raise more questions than answers. And that's one of the interesting features about them. At the end of these workshops, we haven't provided particular answers about this is the way to do it, this is what we should do, here's a solution. But what we've created is a dynamic conversation where people can think, okay, hang on, I hadn't thought about it like that. Oh, how would we resolve that going forward? And I think it's when we start to raise these questions, start to be aware, as has been noted there, about maybe the needs of other people in different contexts, or the other characters or roles within each scenario. When we start to be in those shoes and think about it, it helps us to question that, explore that. And it's only when we start to do that that perhaps we start to explore ways forward or to have more conversations with other people. So it raises questions, but hopefully that leads to more learning, more creativity, more exploration. But it does also, even within that, increase a level of confidence and knowledge. And we, as I say, we do have a resource list that we provide. It's very basic because the resources that exist around, and this is around the UK, not just in Scotland, are very varied and of variable quality. But we're trying to gather together that. And the conference that was held in Edinburgh in September, which we don't have feedback from at this particular point, some of the participants there were a mix of actually obstetricians as well as midwives. There was a much wider multidisciplinary presence, and they provided 3 or 4 new resources that we had. So we keep trying to build on that when we meet with people, which is really good. And I think some of the key thing that role play, while some people would go, oh no, I don't know, it's a bit challenging, not sure I want to take part in that, that everybody who did and everybody who observed said it was really worthwhile and really opened their eyes to situations. So we do believe that this unscripted role play has something valuable to offer. And then just the chance to explore stories and perspectives. And again, if we have a little bit longer than the 1 hour, we can take that forward, from the scenario, we can take it forward to really getting those conversations going and understanding and exploring what might be possible going forward. Some of the feedback has been in terms of improving workshops to have more scenarios. Well, that helps if we have a little bit more time. Some practical suggestions about ways forward, which we are starting to build in. And definitely more chocolate, we were told, which I think we failed to do in our last workshop. So apologies to everybody there.
Thank you very much. Now we are open to your questions. I need to stop sharing.
That's lovely. Gosh, I love you finishing off with requiring more chocolate.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I mean, that's really interesting. It's been interesting for me as having seen this growing as you're going. And I know as a teacher that role play often people find very threatening initially. and they don't quite want to do it. But that's because I think there's been bad experiences in the past for some people where they all feel as though they're acting something instead of actually getting into shoes, which I think is a beautiful way of putting it. And I think it's an incredibly powerful approach that you've described. So thank you so much for sharing with us so far. I mean, I did have a query. I mean, I'm assuming that at the end of this, you'll have some sort of package that you can offer to different midwifery schools to utilize in that very, very, very full curriculum that everybody has. I don't know. Is that the next, or am I too? Is this a long way in advance?
No, I think this is a really good point. And in fact, we had scheduled or planned to have a workshop in Napier University at the beginning of, well, in fact, just on Monday this week it was scheduled for.
Yeah.
But it's exam week and loads of things, and actually we found there wasn't the uptake that we needed to make it worthwhile. So we've postponed it to February. But part of this will be aiming to run the workshop, but with a focus on a conversation with the students who are taking part about how they would like to see it and what would be most useful. So a little bit of work with the students to help us inform, rather than us coming and saying we're going to teach you in this way or schedule it in this way. What do students tell us they would find most beneficial? And we are really starting to explore across the universities in Scotland how this might be embedded within curriculum and what form that might take. And yes, the curriculum is jam-packed and there's so many things that could go in it. So there's going to have to be conversations with lead midwives for education and possibly with the NMC. We are exploring different avenues about how this is embedded where and how much of the curriculum can be allocated to it, if anything, but hopefully some.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, there will be a second workshop at the University of the West of Scotland as well that is set for 19th of February next year. And the goal will still be the same, how what the students want to see in their curriculum. We were initially thinking that we would do this university by university. At least in Scotland, we have only 3 universities teaching midwifery. But then during the Midwifery Festival in Edinburgh, we were told that, why are you trying to go bottom up? You can also try the other way and approach NMC directly and see what they have to say. So I think we will try both ways.
Fabulous. That's fantastic. I'm just waiting for a few other questions to come through. And I think the one of the things that really hit me was the raise in confidence that everybody was expressing. Was that a surprise to you?
I mean, we did the pre and post surveys. In the pre-survey, especially with the student midwives, they literally did not know much. They didn't know where to call when they needed an interpreter. They didn't know how to work with interpreters at all. So I think we start from a very, very low level at the start. Even I'm told that this is despite the fact that the phone number is literally there in the desk somewhere. Is it a triage? I'm not sure where but they have it literally there. But still, nobody knows how to call an interpreter. So after they covered those basic practical things, I think what they needed most is to try to work with an interpreter, even if it's improvised, even if it's like in a role play situation, and just being there and trying to understand how the dynamics work, because it literally adds on to the number of people in the room and the number of agencies, so to speak, in the room. I think that helped them to understand, oh, okay, this is how you can work with interpreters and this is how you can make it better. I think in that respect, the confidence was emphasized mostly. What do you think, Jenny?
I think it was that. And also, I think one of the things that was striking is that people discovered how to position themselves in a room. We would start off one way and realize the dynamic wasn't working. And then either the participants, the role play people, or the audience would say, well, how about if the interpreter stood on this place and the midwife stood here, would that work better? So we then, we experiment with different positions. And I think that left people thinking, right, if I was working with an interpreter, I'd want to sit opposite them or opposite the woman, and as we said at the beginning, improving eye contact and stuff. So even very practical things like that, they came away with thinking, right, I have a little bit more idea about how that could be worked out.
How to actually do it, and allocating more time, of course, because if you have to work with an interpreter, it does always take more time, and time is always the enemy with midwives and students, isn't it?
Yeah, time was one of the key things in terms of limited resources in our findings from that study 2 years ago. Yeah. Time was huge, and it's never going to be an easy one in midwifery, but it's how we creatively use that time, and there are ways of looking at that too.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, some questions coming through. We've got old friends again, Juliet Samuel from Essex. Hi, Juliet. And Juliet, and forgive me for looking away, I'm looking at the other screen to get the question through. Juliet says, good evening, Sue and guests. Great approach, especially incorporating the icebreaker to provide psychological safety. Is there any further support available to staff, bearing in mind that clients rarely have this opportunity within the clinical environment?
You mean without the icebreaker?
Yes, I think so.
No, the icebreaker is only there to encourage the people that, this is a safe environment, and if they take different roles, for instance, if a midwife acts as an anesthetist or as an interpreter, that if they do things wrong, that will still be okay. I think the icebreaker is just to help the people get into the mood. In real situations, obviously, we are talking about cases where the interpreter is rushed in last minute, might be stuck in the traffic, just comes and maybe doesn't even have time to introduce themselves properly and to introduce the roles. It might be that those parents are working with an interpreter for the first time. It won't be for the midwives maybe first time, but for that particular couple, it might be the first time. Sometimes there is not enough time to settle into an interaction. So I fully agree. In real life situations, you may not have that opportunity. Jenny, do you want to add anything?
Well, I think that's true in the real life situation, but one of the skills that midwives do learn, and interpreters, anybody that's working in this world, we do learn how to build rapport quite quickly. It's something that we do with the women and the families, and it's a skill that midwives, start to learn as students. Some become quite natural at it, and others take longer to work out how to be comfortable doing that. But I think most midwives and most health, maternity care professionals and other healthcare professionals have a way of doing that, so that when you're in that real life situation, there's already a way of trying to engage, trying to be relaxed, trying to put the other person at ease. So it's just adding, it's building that. But what it's important, what we're trying to do is help people see that we do that maybe with the women, the families that we're working with, but also how do we do that and build the interpreter into that? The interpreter is a person in this connection. How do we start to build that rapport through and with them? And I think that's something. So I think we have the skills already there. We have the means to do this. It's just about bringing that focus in a wee bit so that we start to think more specifically about how we use that when we're using an interpreter.
I think that's a lovely point, Jenny, because I think it's about, you're right about the relationship building, the rapport that we work on. And of course, we're not necessarily used to having an extra person needing someone else. But of course, if you have that person, they're really important because you're properly able to communicate with the woman and the family in a much real, and so that translator is a very precious resource. Yeah, we have to nurture as much as we nurture the woman and her family. So
could I add something very quickly?
Yes,
I think the language we are using sometimes is not helping the situation, because quite often I see in midwifery documents it refers to the use of interpreting services, which is fair enough, which quickly turns into using the interpreter rather than working with the interpreter. So part of my push of my research is actually changing that language. You work with an interpreter. You don't use the interpreter as a Google Translate machine or a tool. And I think that kind of mentality may need to change.
And I think I was aware as I was speaking there that I said use, and I very quickly go, no, work with. So even I'm learning, I'm still learning. It takes time for us to move our thoughts, but Shevlin's completely right, and that was a bit of a faux pas for me.
It was good. I mean, it gave us a chance to talk about it, because we use services. We use services, but do we use people?
We don't use people. And one of the themes in the research was, is the interpreter a tool or a person? We're talking about a person here.
Yeah.
And building that relationship and rapport. And I think the other part that came up a lot is about continuity. We know the value of continuity in midwifery care in terms of continuity of maternity care provider. But continuity of an interpreter is really important in terms of the relationship that then builds between the three, between the midwife, the interpreter. So in an ideal world, you've got the same midwife seeing the women throughout her pregnancy and possibly during labour and birth. If that same person had the same interpreter coming, and you start to build a relationship between that team, and there were examples in our research of that working incredibly well, where it was organised, but it's such a rare thing to be able to facilitate. But then that's working with people and team and rapport and relationship, not tools. So
No, I think that's absolutely. I mean, we struggle to get continuity with midwives, but in this sort of case, the interpreter is part of the partnership, so a continuity there would be perfect. But I'm just sort of thinking, I wonder, in my experience, it was always a bit difficult because you always have different people rushing in, and I think Shebnam put it really well, of that person coming in and almost not having time to take their coat off before they're interpreting away. So that's fab. Okay, thank you. I've got Kurt Lee. Thank you. Hello, Kurt. And Kurt says, given the identified need for training in linguistic and cultural awareness, what specific curriculum changes or policies should midwifery education institutions adopt to make it a reality? Part one, student midwives here, who feels like we're not really being taught about it enough. Thank you, Kurt. A good question. And I'm somewhere on my horrible desk. There are the proficiencies, and I feel sure that midwifery education follows those proficiencies, and the sort of need for communication and cultural awareness is in there, but it's whether we've given it enough. Jenny, you're itching to speak.
Well, I think the one that's coming right to mind is the fact that we're working in partnership. How can we work in partnership with somebody if we can't communicate fully with them? And Kurt's quite right. We need to, and we're still learning how best to build this into the curriculum. The curriculum is, I've been a lecturer for 4 years now, and I can see how absolutely crammed the curriculum is. And there's still many aspects of maternity care and midwifery care and relationship building, and there's so many other things we could keep adding that would be really optimizing what we do as midwives. But we just can't fit it all in. There's, how do we learn how to have a consultation? So even in the first sharing the same first language, having a consultation where we provide information and we communicate, that's still something that needs to be learned and is still challenging. And then we just increase the needs there if we're trying to work through and with an interpreter in that situation. So I'm not sure I have an answer yet, but this is exactly what we want to look at. And I think it would be great, and hopefully the new project that Shebnam's leading on just now will start to explore how do we factor some of this into antenatal education, but into midwifery education as well. So watch this space, because that's the work we're trying to do in exploring how best this can happen in an efficient way that will enable us to embed it without, crashing the system.
I'll just add very quickly to everything Jenny said, which I agree. I think there's quite a bit of discussion for the last couple of years about unconscious bias in healthcare, and also under the general title of decolonizing maternal healthcare. So I think those may be the areas where such training can complement. What does it mean to decolonize the midwifery care if we are still expecting everybody to be able to communicate with us in English? What does it mean to get rid of your unconscious bias if you are still infantilizing the people you are working with? So I think that there might be some entry points there.
So good point.
Okay. Great point. Okay, we've got a comment which links in a little bit, I think, which is from Jo Deguston. Hi, Jo. And she says she's from Ames. She says it's amazing how much educators need to fit into the curriculum. Thank you, Jo. Absolutely. I'm sure many will appreciate your work on this important issue. Thank you. So that's okay. So that's Jo. And then Kurt has come back, Kurt Lee, back for a second bite. Just on the self-assessed post-workshop competence, what does extremely confident look like to you? How would you describe someone with that level of competence? Whoa, good question.
Question, definitely. I think the first thing I would expect that, that they have a way of understanding which language this couple or this birthing woman speaks in the first place, because we have so many situations where somebody comes and says, oh, we need an Arabic interpreter, ignoring the fact that there are so many different versions of Arabic spoken. So finding out exactly which language you need interpreters for, being able to reach the interpreting services quite smoothly, tech considerations aside, introducing the interpreter, giving chance to the interpreter to introduce themselves, introducing everybody's roles. This is what is expected of you in this interaction. This is how it will proceed. Having the confidence to ask for extra time, though I'm very much aware that I'm an outsider and I cannot talk on behalf of the midwives, but probably having that confidence to say, there is no way I can squeeze in this, what is the initial consultation, Jenny, what do you call it?
The booking
appointment. That there's no way I can finish this booking appointment in this allocated time because I need an interpreter at the same time. So that confidence for negotiating and carrying out all these interactions, I think, would be extremely confident for me. Jenny, what would you say?
Yes, I agree. To somebody who knows that they can sort of just walk into that situation and know exactly what they need to do and how to navigate and resource it. And I think it already does happen. There are midwives who will arrange a double appointment for extra time if they know they're going to be working with an interpreter. The booking appointment will be an extended time. The routine antenatal appointments, instead of being 10 or 15 minutes, might be a double appointment. And I know midwives who already do that, who already have the confidence to just block that time and make that space available. So it can be done. So yes, somebody who's confident will be just leading on that, I would say.
And you have to be quite strong to be able to do that when people are busy and someone's saying, how long have you been doing that booking? Half an hour.
But I think they might be best reminded how much NHS needs to deal with litigation. And when it's litigation, quite often language and cultural barriers do come up. So in the long run, it's saving time, it's saving money, let alone saving people's health and lives.
Well, that's beautifully put. I mean, if we only have to think about the Embrace reports.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, and that's not just its cost in human cost.
Yeah.
For the women and the babies and for midwives as well. So yeah, that absolutely. Sorry, Jenny, you could say something.
No, I was just going to say that I think the NMC would support this as well, because the NMC want that optimal care. They don't want us to cut corners. And I know it's all got to be balanced within time and resources and various things. But I've said this, but I remember saying to a student once who had been told by somebody else she was not going to be marked well because she'd taken too long for a booking appointment. And in that booking appointment, there was no interpretation needs, but the woman had some other complex needs. So the student had taken time to gain that information and build confidence. And I said to her, well, if you were to go to the NMC and say, oh, I just rushed it and got it done within the hour because that's what I was told, or I took an extra 20 minutes, but I identified these particular needs of this individual, which we need to take account of. Which one's the NMC going to be happy with? Which one are you going to stand in front of? So I think, we have a remit to do this. Well, we have a mandate to do this. It's just how that ties together, which, we're trying to do two things that don't tie together well, but we do know where our responsibilities lie, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, I've got another comment. And this is you again, Jo Deguston from Ames. Wonderful to see the developments in this area from Do we need an interpreter too? I'm confident working with interpreters and know how to make sure interpreted conversations are high quality. In England, I'll look out for this issue in the CPD core competency framework. Thank you, Joe. Well done. Okay. And we've got another comment from Aretha Comanescu. I'd recommend requesting the same interpreter, especially when patients are attending multiple appointments. It will help build the rapport, but also is helpful continuity. Really, Aretha, absolutely. If you've got the ability to do that, that is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Okay, another DD. Hello, DD. Who says, I've just finished a project with deaf women on their experiences on the maternity services in Ireland. The interpreter has to be an integral part of the tripartite relationship. Lovely. I love the tripartite relationship. This is essential for safe and effective care and communication. The women said they benefited from continuity of interpreter. So we as maternity care providers need to find a way to meet these women's needs. Absolutely. Beautifully put. And then Leanna is saying, how do you address the quality of the interpreter? For example, how can we ensure that they're saying blood instead of water?
This is a question that comes up in almost all the workshops. Without knowing the language, obviously there is no way of checking out. But most of the time, we know that by if you can understand from the body language if something is not working right, something is not being interpreted rightly, and there are ways of checking and double checking with the women, with their partner, whether they are understanding it in the way that you intend to impart the information. If in that conversation, if things are still being patchy, then you can start doubting that maybe the competence of this interpreter might be okay in their language, but maybe they have problems with the terminology. Maybe they've never interpreted in a maternal health context before. Or maybe they are familiar with maternal health, but they are not familiar with the NHS maternal health context. They may be familiar with wherever they were coming from. So I think it's a continuous checking and double checking, both with the interpreters and with the parents, whether it is working or not. And beyond that, unfortunately, in terms of qualification, you put your trust in the translation agencies that are establishing this liaison between the hospital and the interpreters. Jenny, do you want to add anything there?
No, I think what you said is bang on, because it's not a standardized situation, and we don't have access to the range of interpreters we might need for all languages and all dialects. And so we do have to work and navigate as best we can. And I remember from our first study that some midwife participants, and they were talking exactly about this and saying that you can tell by the demeanour of the woman and her partner whether the information we want them to receive, what we're saying, is getting through or not. We can interpret that. And so experienced midwives who are used to working with interpreters have developed ways of navigating this. And that's something maybe we need to learn from as well. And maybe we need to build in.
And maybe it goes to the kind of relationship that you're building with that interpreter, because they're learning as well. Because if they're new to NHS language, it's very different, isn't it? I mean,
but
it takes
whatever
a bit
we
of
are
learning
saying,
when we came into it.
whatever we are saying now is, of course, slightly going against the current, because there is more and more emphasis on remote interpreting. The money that is being put in is not for face-to-face interpreting, but for remote interpreting, and all those cues that we are talking about will be lost there.
Yeah, and mostly we need people in maternity, don't we? No, that's fab. And Kurt Lee's come back. Thank you, Kurt, and said, thank you for answering my questions. Very helpful session. I'm at UWS, so we'll hopefully meet you both in February for our workshop. Well, how lovely is that? That's continuity indeed. Fabulous. Do you know, I always say, and this has been a little theme through the whole session, but it's always an issue for us on the maternity hour, because this hour is the fastest in the week. I always say it and I always mean it. But I want to say a huge thank you to Jenny and Shebnam for joining us this evening. they'll be back, because this is a project that's really, really important. And each time, this is telling a wonderful story with little threads and themes all the way through it, which are crucial for good maternity care, and for us as midwives and student midwives, and for women and babies and their families. So thank you so much for sharing your work. Shame you couldn't share the chocolate. That would have been nice. But we'll have to make sure next time you come to the next festival, we provide some chocolate to assist in the matter. Anyway, so a huge thank you. I'm going to say also thank you to Angela, who's in the background, making sure this is all being recorded nicely. So for those of you who want a 6 o'clock in the morning podcast on Friday, it'll be ready. Otherwise, it'll be ready online for you to play again if you'd like to. And if you want to share this, I'm going to repeat this, share it with your colleagues and your student groups if you can, because this is really important. And there's some thoughts about relationship and about relationship with interprofessionals that are really important. Also want to say thank you to Paul, who's been feeding the questions and the comments through to me. Now he's just sneaked another comment which says, thank you. This is Tamara Cumberbatch. Hi, Tamara. A really important area. Thank you for this insightful webinar. It would be great if we had a national standard for interpretation services, as sometimes there are big differences from one area to another in terms of quality and access to services. Great, that's absolutely so. I think it's something, and it would be very sad if we moved to, I don't know, artificial intelligence or whatever. Face to face, nothing meets that face, that eye contact you can have with another human being. So that's my personal thing. So in the meantime, make sure Maternity and Midwifery Hour next week, we're going to look at research and innovation in midwifery learning and teaching with Susan Hughes and Emily B. And don't forget to book for the London Festival on the 11th of February 2025. How can it possibly be 2025? But it is. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next week. And thank you again to Jenny and Shebnam.
Thank you.
Welcome to MatFlix, video streaming from maternity experts. My name is Dr. Jenny Hall. I am the box set's curator at MatFlix, a fellow of the Royal College of Midwives and a former editor of The Practicing Midwife. At MatFlix, we bring together videos of talks from top maternity experts into box sets to support your continued professional development, study and revalidation. It is a perfect study accompaniment for midwives, maternity professionals, midwifery students and anyone thinking about a career in the maternity services. My job is bringing together the latest thinking area by area so you do not have to. Not only do you get the video of brilliant talks and relevant content in thematic box sets, you also get access to the audio version so you can listen on the commute or while you walk the dog. Plus links to the latest research in the relevant field, government policy documents, the presenter's PowerPoint and more besides. Sign up to MatFlix now for the best video streaming from maternity experts.
It's always a pleasure to be here, and I always try as hard as I can to support this excellent platform that's so flexible, that's responsive, that's